You're watching News at Prime. Let's get into this discussion now. The Basic Education Minister, Siviwe Gwarube, is warning that her department is facing a looming funding crisis. This is due to budget cuts. She's given assurances, though, that nobody will lose their jobs due to the over 4 billion rand shortfall. But she does say that vacant posts will remain unfilled. The minister joins me in studio tonight to tell us her plans on how she is going to navigate this. Minister, good evening to you and thank you.
Good evening, Xoli, and thank you for having me. It's
good to have you here. First time talking to you after your appointment. Yes. I'd like to begin with the 2 to 3 years that you are warning about, that if this is not resolved, the department may likely see a crunch. Explain that in a bit of detail for us. What exactly are you anticipating?
So, Xoli, of course, I think your viewers may have seen some provinces coming forward and saying, you know, we won't be able to fill our current basket of posts. They are feeling the crunch. I think particularly provinces such as Gauteng, Western Cape, and even KwaZulu-Natal, who experience intensive in-migration in their provinces, are saying we're seeing increasing number of learners, and as a result we are feeling the crunch. And so what then that did was, I didn't want to deal with provinces per province. We wanted to have a very clear picture of what the entire sector is looking at. And we did an analysis as the DBE of looking at all the budgets of the entire sector, of the provinces, so we can better understand where are they experiencing pressures. This is also important for me, obviously, as a new minister, so that I know what we're dealing with in terms of in the next 1 to 2 to 3 years. And so what we have found is that if the current trajectory continues, we are likely to see about a 79 billion to 118 billion rand shortfall over 3 years. Now, of course, that would be catastrophic. And so this is why it's important to do this kind of planning now, so that you can be able to say to the cabinet, to government, that, look, we are going to be headed to a crisis unless we stem this kind of free fall that we are in right now. And so that's the process. So there are immediate solutions that we are proposing, being that we will now be making a consolidated case to Treasury to say, these are the immediate pressures that we are facing. Can we be found a financial solution in the upcoming medium-term budget policy statement? Of course, Treasury follows its own process. We can't tamper with that, but it doesn't mean that we can't make a case for why we need to protect frontline services in the sector.
And I take it that that case has been made to National Treasury. What is their response?
Look, Treasury has been incredibly supportive, and the Minister Godongwana, has been incredibly supportive too. We've had informal conversations about this, but we are wanting to put together what they call a 10 by 10. So a meeting of all the 9 provincial treasuries, all the 9 provincial departments of education, and DBE and Treasury, so that we can better make a full case. Because if we go to Treasury province per province, I don't think we are capturing the essence of what's going on. But if we're saying we've done an analysis and these are the proposals we're making. But I also think it's important to say this caveat. It's going to be important for us as a sector to also indicate to Treasury, what are we prepared to do to save costs? What are we prepared to do to make sure that we are cutting down on wasteful expenditure? What are we going to do to make sure that none of the provincial departments send money back to Treasury because of underspend? So there's a commitment we have to make alongside what we are asking Treasury to do.
The Western Cape has already cut 2,400 teacher posts. Can that decision be reversed at this stage?
It could potentially be. It's difficult to make that determination because, again, I'm very careful not to place the Minister of Finance in a difficult position. He's not just dealing with the Departments of Education's budget. He has to have a whole sector, so a whole government look. And I'm sure pressures are everywhere. I'm pretty sure if you asked the Minister of Health, he'll make the same case. I'm sure if you ask the Minister of Police, he'd make the same case. And so, but this is what speaks to the longer-term solutions then, Xoli, that I'm saying that as a government now that is beyond DBE, we need to have a serious conversation about what is critical to this government. Is education important? Therefore, we must put our money where our mouth is. Is policing more important? Is healthcare important? We need to make a government-wide approach of budgeting. We haven't always gotten it right. We know over 300 billion has been spent bailing out SOEs in the past 10 years. We've lost 1.5 trillion rand in corruption. So there is a conversation to be had as an entire government of the 7th administration to ask ourselves, how do we fund critical services that we cannot do without?
Just to drive that point home, perhaps, of that wastage you've spoken about. Today, you were quoted as saying the following, as regards the budget cuts. This may mean larger class sizes, reduced individual attention for learners, and ultimately a risk to the achievement of quality education outcomes. That last bit is what is key here. What is the risk to the quality of education?
Well, the risk is simply this. If provinces are saying we're not going to be able to fill posts where vacancies are created, that means we're going to be dealing with large class sizes. Already we're dealing with an overcrowding issue, particularly in provinces where we are seeing higher in-migration. The MEC in Gauteng will tell you that every single year he sees an increase of hundreds of thousands of learners coming here because of, obviously, parents seeking economic opportunities. So also as a government, we also have to be responsive in how budgeting. We can't lament that learners are coming to centers of economic opportunities. We then have to be responsive to that. How do we make sure that our budget follows the kind of in-migration that we're seeing? So I'm worried that if we're not filling critical posts, we're going to see classrooms up to a ratio of 1 to 80, potentially in many years to come. And my worry with that is that we can't then be saying we want to improve education outcomes in South Africa if we are expecting an educator to teach a classroom of 80 learners. There's absolutely no way you can drive outcomes and protect learning and teaching time in that environment. So that's why I'm saying it's important to start the conversation now, because I don't want to come sit here 3 years from now and you asking me why is it that there's a teacher that is sitting with a classroom full of 85 learners, and why is it that our results are dropping? Why is it that grade 4, the number of grade 4 learners cannot read for meaning? I can't then come to you and say, well, because of budget cuts. I need to be able to say, this is what I did when I saw the picture being painted in front of me. This is the conversation I brought to cabinet when I saw the issue being brought before my attention.
Perhaps one last point on the quality of education outcomes. It's also largely dependent on the teacher in class. I'd like to shift the attention and focus it on the new generation of teachers that are coming into the system versus those that are old and going into retirement. Talk to me about the quality between the two. Is the new crop skilled enough for the 21st century type of teaching and learning, or are the old teachers perhaps still the ones that are trusted more?
It's a critical question that the sector is grappling with, and I'll answer it in 2 ways. Number one, it requires our attention. The split between DBE and higher ed has many advantages, but what it has also created an unintended consequence of there not being closer attention to the loop, where you have learners who are leaving grade 12, going to institutions of higher learning, wanting to come back into the sector as educators. We need to have a conversation with higher education to say, these are the needs of our classrooms in the 21st century. So therefore, what you are teaching at university needs to align with that. One of the things that we've seen and we have to fix is that we are struggling to find teachers who are skilled in the art of teaching. And so one of the things, the gaps we need to fill there, is to make sure that while our younger teachers are leaving higher education institutions with incredible knowledge, but there is also an element where there's a teaching of the actual art of teaching a learner. But as it comes to the older teachers who are leaving the system, I think it's important to have a generational mix because there are incredible things and there are incredible people in the system who we are worried about losing, because we still want our younger generation of teachers to be able to gain from the more experienced teachers. The older generation of teachers may not necessarily be the most attuned, for instance, with technology, but they certainly have skills that we can benefit from. So the trick here is a balance where you are keeping your experienced teachers, but then you are having a constant feeding of new teachers who are learning from them, so that we can keep the skill, we can keep the institutional knowledge. But also, it's important, Oli, that one of my priorities, as I've indicated, is teacher development. We've got to support our teachers. They teach in difficult conditions. We've got to make sure that we are giving them training. We've got to make sure we're giving them support. But all of this has to come from a 330 billion rand budget. And so at some point, as government, we also have to talk about how do we offload some of the things that are not our core business as DBE. Things like school safety, that may not necessarily be something that should be coming from us. Things like, building infrastructure, that might be something that Minister McPherson needs to take on. So there are creative ways that as a government we can, that's why I'm saying these challenges are not insurmountable. I don't want to depress South Africans. They're not insurmountable, but they do require us to be creative. They do require us to really mean it when we say we're prioritizing. And they do require us to know that protecting frontline services like education is critical.
Quantity, rather quality over quantity. How many of the teachers are you finding who are not qualified and have to be kicked out of the system? Are there any of those?
Look, I mean, so training gaps have to be identified by the districts. And there are a lot of opportunities actually in the system. There's a Funza Lushaka bursary. And in fact, the other thing which I think is really incredible, and I must commend some of our partners for this, some of our teacher unions are also offering training programs. Some of our private partners are offering bursary opportunities. So the opportunities are there. There are ways and means that we can tap into the system and get more out of it. But we have to not be stuck in the old way of doing government. We have to think about how do we tap into, I can tell you now, all 5 of our teacher unions have programs where they are targeting upskilling teachers. So how do we make sure that our budget is aligned with that? How do we make sure that there is uniformity across all the training materials for our teachers? So there are ways and means that we can do this, but we've got to embrace change.
Quickly, I want to turn the subject. The 10 billion rand nutrition scheme. Why did you stop that?
Well, when I came into office, the department had embarked on a process to modernize what we call the school nutrition program. The school nutrition program at the moment is structured as follows. It's a 10 billion rand conditional grant that comes from Treasury directly to provinces. So some provinces handle it differently. They either centralize the procurement of food for learners at a provincial level. Some provinces, for instance, like the Northern Cape, because of distances, they send monies directly to the schools. Of course, in that kind of system, there are bound to be inefficiencies. And the department was of the view that we've got to tighten the process and seek to close these inefficiencies, because we are going to have new learners coming to the system. We've got ECD that is coming into the system. We've got early child development learners who are coming into the system. So we're going to have to do more for less. So that was the strategy behind saying the department wants to modernize. However, when I came into office, then I asking the detail of how we want to modernize. And that's when I was not entirely convinced that taking the risk of centralizing procurement into one single entity is worth it. Yeah. We saw how this happened with NSFAS, and my fear was there are 9.7 million learners who depend on those school meals a day. Some of them, that's the only meal they'll have that day. I cannot have a scenario where one entity mismanages that grant and there are kids that are starving and cannot learn. And so I had to take precautions to say, let's cancel, let's go back to the drawing board. How can we create the efficiencies but then guard against, you know, not having this entire grant completely mismanaged, because it's a huge grant, 10 billion over 10 years. And so that's weighty, and I needed time.
It's a massive amount of money. I almost feel as though there is some information you're holding back. There is talk of someone who blew the whistle on this contract. Maybe when we return from the break, you'll talk to us about whether a whistleblower came through to talk to you about this. We'll continue the conversation in a moment. If you're just joining us, we're in conversation with the Basic Education Minister, Siviwe Gwarube. Minister, let's quickly close the chapter around the 10 billion rand feeding scheme. Part of the reading I did prepping for this interview was that a whistleblower may have come through to say there is likely corruption here. Please stop it whilst it's still early. Is that true?
Look, Oli, there were a number of people who raised concerns with me, including some of my colleagues in cabinet, to say there are unintended consequences with centralizing a contract this big. For instance, there's unintended consequences for small businesses. How do they benefit when there's a centralized procurement of this kind? And so, of course, I mean, you know, I'm also not viewing this in a vacuum. I live in South Africa and have been a politician here for 6 years now. So I'm also well aware that contracts of this size do lend themselves to looting. And my biggest fear that I would not be able to live with myself is agreeing to something that would be prone to large-scale corruption that would lead to children not eating. Yeah. That, for me, was the deciding factor. I'm not saying that the inefficiencies are not there, and I'm not saying modernizing is not needed, but I need assurances that there are good governance practices in place and assurances that we will be able to buttress anything that goes wrong. Of course there are problems. You saw KZN, they had an issue with their school nutrition program. So I'm not saying the current system is perfect, but I'm afraid, I think I'm justified in being terrified of putting the 10 billion rand or 100 billion rand contract in the hands of one person to cater for 9.7 million learners every single day.
So it went from being suspended to being cancelled. Where to now?
So we're going back to the drawing table. So I would like the department to take me through a process of how do we can even consult our stakeholders, our partners, to say, how can we come up with a modernized way of doing school nutrition that does fix the leakages? Because there are leakages. We know that there's corruption in the system. We know that in some schools food is taken away, and we know that not every single child every single day gets their meal. There are inefficiencies in the system. And one thing I've learned about in my very long 3 months in government is that there's no perfect solution, but you have to choose a solution that does the least amount of harm to the least amount of people and can benefit the most amount of people. Yeah. And that, for me, was the deciding factor. So we go back to the drawing board, and we as a team and DBE look at how do we help provinces make it efficient. Yeah. Because decentralization, I think, does help mitigate some of the risks.
Bella Bill.
Yes.
That's a new topic.
Yes.
Why did you snub it? Why did you snub the signing ceremony? Some people, some sections of the population were very aggrieved by that decision.
So I think it's also important, Ole, firstly, it's now the Bella Act. It's been signed into law by the President. In fact, my department and I are starting the process of looking at implementation plans for sections of the Act that are now have been enacted. Of course, the President has taken clauses 4 and 5 for consultation, and that's a process that he must lead. I also think I want to make this point, that it's important to say that I did not snub the President. People say I boycotted, and that's not an accurate reflection. The President was aware that I would not be in attendance.
Why not?
Well, there were disagreements, Oli, about, there were things that in the government of national unity had not been ironed out. But I think what the assurance that I can give South Africans now is that flowing from all of that, we now have decided the government of national unity will be establishing a technical committee which will deal with issues of policy differences before they even get to government. We have to also remember that this government of national unity brings together political parties that are different in nature, that have different ideological beliefs.
Minister?
Yes, Oli. Let me finish. What I'm saying is it's a complex process to bring together these political parties. That's why this clearing committee or this technical committee is important going forward.
Technicalities aside, you are a minister serving in government
Yes.
under the stewardship of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Politics aside, you come from a different political party, he comes from a different political party. There is what people view as, first and foremost, professionalism and adhering to or being seen to understand that there is an authority above you. What people cannot stomach is a minister who says, I'm not going to go to a signing ceremony because my party does not agree with that. Because then the question comes, how are you going to implement the very same policy which you are boycotting?
I'm very glad you asked that question, and I want to answer it in two ways. Number one, I think that as a government of national unity, we had not established ways in which we will resolve conflict. And it's an important point to make, because differences need to be clarified, because there will be differences in policy decision-making. The reason why I'm also disagreeing by saying that I was unprofessional or disagreed with the president is that, as I said, I was in conversation with the president. I made him aware of my decision, did not snub this. The second point I also want to make is law is something, a signing ceremony is very different from asking me, will I implement the law? I took an oath to serve, and I took an oath to uphold the laws of the Republic. When a law is signed into, when a bill is signed into an act, only I am bound by the Constitution to implement it. In fact, even before the signing ceremony, I was on record saying, should this bill be enacted, regardless of what the political differences are, I will be obliged to implement. So I want to assure people at home that there must never be any question about, will I do my constitutional duty of upholding the Constitution and making sure that laws are applied? I will do so.
But their concern is that you perhaps allowed the politics of the day, you allowed the politics of your party to interfere with your professional work in government. So when you say you had conversations with the president and he knew that you would not show up, did you get an instruction from the Democratic Alliance to say you're not going to that signing ceremony?
No, I don't want to go into that, except to say that I think this, the process with the Bela bill had exposed to us in the government of national unity the need to resolve our policy and political differences before they get to the level of which being government laws and policies. It's important because we have been in government together for 3 months. There are things that the DA, the IFP, or whatever other parties in the GNU had indicated are their red lines when getting into that government of national unity. So in as much as I completely understand the notion that, of course, I'm a government minister, and of course I report to the president, but we must also not be completely naive in divorcing the politics from how that they will affect and play out in the government. That's why, for me, this clearing and technical committee becomes important, because it insulates the government from the politics. So I'm saying this has been a learning curve for the government of national unity. And in fact, if you had seen the statement from the post-cabinet briefing from Minister Njabeni, it said that it was decided with resounding support at a cabinet level that this will now be put in place. So I'm confident that we will be able to, one, see out the 5-year term as a GNU, and that we'll be able to clear these things as we go along.
So final one on this point, therefore. How do you, or what's your response to critics who say you undermined the authority of the president and therefore you should vacate office?
I disagree. I think I don't think that at the first hurdle of the GNU, I should give up on what I set out to do for the next 5 years. I think there's a lot that has to be done, and I think I'm committed to doing it. And so, well, this is going to be difficult. Putting a government of national unity was always going to be difficult. But we can't, at the first hurdle, say, well, this is simply not working, or, well, she must go. I don't think that's entirely fair. I think we must understand that, of course, there'll be teething problems, but we must roll with it. We must put the people first at whatever we do. And I'm saying to you here on this show, in front of your audience, that I will put the people first. I will put the people first by making sure whatever the Constitution says is upheld. I will never, ever not apply my oath of office. But a signing ceremony is very different from not doing your job or not fulfilling your responsibilities. So I will certainly be there to uphold the Constitution as I can. But I must say that after 100 days, I'm more confident now more than ever that I think we are realizing the complexity of this government, and we are learning as we get along, but we are putting safeguards in place to insulate government from the politics.
Two questions in one because of time. So putting people first means that you are going to implement this Bela Act, but there are these two clauses, 4 and 5. So question one, how do you help in that process of ironing out whatever the issues are? And for you, how intricate are these processes, or is this something really simple? And finally, do you think in the 5 years that you have, you will at least make a dent in this department? And where might that be where you will say, these are the results they are showing after 5 years in office? So
quickly, the suspension of clause 4 and 5 is now a presidential process. So the president will outline what the process looks like, how the consultation will happen. And so then we will be able to we'll have to be guided by the outcomes of those consultations. So that's why I have sought to say to the department, look, well, the suspension of clause 4 and 5 aside, there's a lot of work we need to do to prepare the system for grade R becoming compulsory. There's some good things that we need to also start to implement, things like criminalizing corporal punishment. These things are progressive in this bill. So we start the process of implementing them. We will be led by the president by his process when that process is done. In terms of where I seek to make a difference, clearly my obsession for the next 5 years is how do we improve education outcomes in South Africa. We are nowhere near where we should be. There are things that we can learn from countries with a similar socioeconomic status as us, but we need to make sure that we're not just obsessing about matric results, but we are also obsessing about, is the child entering grade R going to complete matric and come out with a quality product that will unlock economic opportunities for them? Once we are able to say that the system is strong enough along the way, then I think we will be doing a good job. So for me, I think what will success look like in 2029, seeing improved education outcomes, not just at a matric pass rate, but also seeing education outcomes of literacy. Can kids read for meaning by grade 4? Can kids are more and more learners taking on maths and science? Are we seeing more and more learners immersed in robotics and preparing them for economy of the future? So that's what success would look like for me. And so that's why I don't want to be distracted by hurdles along the way. I'm really keen to take hands with all our stakeholders and get this job done.
Well, wish you best of luck. And in those 5 years, I hope you and I will still sit across this table and you will be pointing at your successes.